All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into something today. And it's going to be a little bit spicy. Not fully spicy. I mean, it is Reddit on a comment or on a. It's on a Reddit thread that only has 3 comments. One of them is which is my response. And it came to mind that this would be something worth responding to. So, a couple of days ago, I posted inside of I believe it's Spartak or maybe it's TNO's community Discord for Frost Giant Games for Stormgate. And I posted in 2 videos, one of which is the idea that Rax was very similar to the Infernal faction or the Infernal host, and the second one is the one of the pose of me doing the communist stand like this, where I ask, are any maps Vanguard favored with a capital A-N-Y? And the answer is yes, 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 as I'm like just doing the iconic pose. And that video got downvoted pretty hard. I think at one point it was down to like 17%, like 0 posts only because Reddit doesn't want to show you negative 55, and 17%. But over the last couple of days, I've actually seen it climb up from just being completely dumpstered to 0 to having like a 40% upvote, which isn't great. You know, that means that it's like a little worse than a 50-50. And I think a lot of that, though, has to come with the fact that a person asked a question that was, on its surface to me, kind of unreasonable, because I'm a big fan of you could just go watch the content and figure this out. But I realized Reddit is a different platform than Twitch, is a different platform than YouTube, and also a lot of people don't know who I am. And so this person's question was actually quite reasonable. They said, from what I understand, you don't have beta access, so why should I listen to you when you talk about balance? It seems a little bit bold. Now, that is a completely surface level take, and it's not necessarily a bad one to have, after all. If you are coming from StarCraft 2, if you're coming from Warcraft 3, maybe even if you're from Company of Heroes or Zero Space, you have no idea who I am. I have no footprint and no presence in those games. I'm not someone who's known in AoE 2 or AoE 4. I'm not a pre-existing YouTube content creator. My stream kind of shows that I don't have a lot going on. In fact, the channel that I have the most subscriptions on and the most video traffic on doesn't even have my name on it. It's not actually the Atano Circus channel that everything of my socials on here and Twitch links over to, and you can check with Bang Socials over there on Reddit. It's actually Little Wargame RTS. I've come from games that you have probably never heard of, or if you have heard of them, you heard of them a little bit a couple of years ago, and thus I would be largely invisible to you, either because I was part of games that were in NDAs that I couldn't discuss and they fell under, or they had their time in the sun and then they found out that they were in Alaska when it was the winter and they only got 1 hour and then they were put out to side. So I actually responded to this because this is not just, you're not in the beta, you don't have access, what are you talking about? This is questioning what is even the value add? What's the unique selling proposition? What's the purpose of you getting out here trying to make these videos? Why are you, ostensibly, why are you making a fool of yourself looking for all of these videos, trying to make this content, trying to get people engaged in something where you could be absolutely ass end over wrong in a couple of weeks? And in fact, with Steam Next Fest, I'm going to tell you right now, some of the things that I have said or predicted will either be right and you will never know because the balance has changed, or they'll be wrong and it will look like I'm right, and again, you'll never know the difference if you're not part of the beta because the balance will have changed. So there's like a multi-part explanation to why you should care, why you should listen, what's the relevancy. If you think that's crazy, just stick around, okay? We're going to go over the 4 points, and then I'm going to break them back down, and then we'll go over some lateral points or some tertiary or a quaternary, like later on points that are still relevant. You should still think about, if you have like a human interest in just knowing why I do the things that I do, and a little bit about who I am and where I come from, then yeah, feel free to stick around. Obviously, this isn't Ask Me Anything, so if you have any questions, I'll try and introduce the questions that you ask in an order that would be appropriate to the story or the theme that's going on here. So, 4 points. First thing is so the video in question that I was doing was, does any, with capital any, map favor Vanguard? And this is at a time, by the way, before Mana's video came out. If you're watching this now, this is January 22nd, 2024. Mana's video against Kiwiyami, something like that, just came out earlier today. And that was the first time we've seen any public game from the playtest realm, or the PTR. If you're not familiar with what PTR stood for before, you certainly are now. That's the first time we saw publicly any Vanguard wins, and I mean any Vanguard wins, as in like DreamHack Atlanta, we just saw TLO, the only Vanguard player, lose 2 games. And then after that, like Azure and Mixu and the Artosis Super Cup that's been done with Mappa, Alpu, and you can check Bang Super Cup to look over there. Also complete washouts, looking real bad for Vanguard. So this is not a hot take. This is like, we're going to have to invent something after Scovilles, because this take can't even be nuclear. This take, like, there can't be moisture left on the earth after this take. So the first point I said was, and the contention of that video, if you're watching, is whether or not a map favors a faction is independent of whether or not that faction is underpowered or overpowered. Just let that sit in your head. The second thing is, and this is the one I want to stress for all of you who are watching, especially if you're watching and you can't tell me anything because you're secretly part of the beta and maybe you know some stuff and you would love to tell me how I'm right or how I'm wrong, or you watch pre-existing content creators, or you watch these grandmasters who come over from StarCraft 2 and you know that they're in the beta, or your friend's in and he's telling you that I'm just wrong ass over end and I don't know what I'm talking about and my foot's in my mouth the whole time. Second point, as a player outside the beta, I can create this content and speculate to my heart's content without skirting an NDA. That's not something the people that are inside the beta can actually do. They don't have the freedom to do that. Okay, we're going to go on to the third point. I've pushed the nascent balance states, remade metas, and pushed analytical development of multiple RTS games. This isn't my first ride at the studio. You just haven't heard of it because it's not, as I said, StarCraft 2, Warcraft 3, Company of Heroes, Age of Empires, I mean, to a lesser extent, Zero Space. You know, these aren't games that you have heard of me in because I have no footprint there. Or if I do have a footprint, it is at the level of someone who's just a player and not particularly a great player or a bad player, just like a middling player. And then the final thing is that all the information that I have registered here can actually be brought up and inferred from public games. And so my videos are another way for the Frost Giant team and the people that are part of the Stormgate community to actually look at the state of balance and design and conversation and what the game looks like from the perspective of somebody who is, I'm not going to say unbiased, but whose bias is in favor of not being part of the beta, right? So let's go back and we'll unpack some of these. So the first thing, whether or not a map favors a faction is independent of whether or not that faction is overpowered or underpowered or overpowered. So I use the example here of Gotham chess, right? So if you don't know, when you play chess, there's a point scale, +10, -10, right? And it can go beyond that, but we don't really think that it needs to go beyond that. If you're plus, that favors the white pieces. If you're minus, that favors the black or dark pieces. So I mentioned Gotham chess, who is probably the most prolific content creator and certainly one of the most famous YouTube people on chess. He's not a Hikaru Nakamura. He's not a Hikaru Nakamura. He's not a Magnus Carlsen, right? He's not one of these people. I don't even believe, although I could be wrong, I don't even believe that he has met the qualifications to be Grandmaster, but he is nevertheless far and away like ridiculously above my skill level. But remember in chess that we use these points to dictate how favored a person's board position is, right? So if I have a +2 board position, right, which means white is favored by 2 points, which is roughly equivalent to 2 pawns, or roughly equivalent to having the first move advantage 4 times at the start of the game, right? That's a little simplification, but not too much of one. If that's the case, I'm favored. Now I'm up against Gotham Chess, who is way better than me. And that means that he is going to destroy me. In the sense of the game, in the actual sense of reality, he is more skilled than I am. In the sense of the game, he is overpowered, right? Now, no one could look at the board state, which we can consider to be the Stormgate equivalent of a map, and say that I'm not favored. Pieces are in good position, everything is placed nicely. I just have to make one move at a time. But I can't make them in the right way or in the right sequencing, or I'll make bad tactical decisions or strategic decisions, or I'll just blunder because of the way that I play the game, and he will clean me up shortly thereafter. As long as it's not a mate-in-2 scenario or something like that, and we're playing a real game of chess, he's going to destroy me, but we would still say that that board position favors me. Now, that might sound a little abstract, so we're going to back a little bit up. What if we're playing Stormgate? Well, I give the example here. I think it's funny, so we're just going to read it. Secluded Grove provides an easy game plan for Infernals versus Vanguard. If the Vulcan suddenly grew wings, moved at double the movement speed of Fiends, had triple damage, and its AoE cone covered the screen, we would say that the Vulcan was overpowered, but I would still assert that Secluded Grove gives a better game plan for Infernals. So now you kind of understand what I was getting at when I was talking about the benefits that the maps have for the factions, somewhat independent of the balance, right? If you just listed the series of stats I gave the Vulcan, flying, double movement speed, triple the health, and a cone of damage, triple the damage, and a cone that covers the entire screen, that would be ludicrously overpowered. Basically, every Vanguard player would win the second that they made of a Vulcan against Infernals. By all accounts, Vulcans, that kind of Vulcan would represent a threat that an Infernal player would never have the ability to deal with. And in fact, Infernals already look like they're kind of struggling to figure out what their late game tech is. I'm not entirely convinced that Magmadons and Weavers are quite the equivalent of something like, even though they seem similar, something like Magmadons and Atlases, right? But what I'm getting at is, if we saw that the Vulcan was that overpowered, everything would be a mirror match. We would just have mirror matches of Vanguard v Vanguard, and all we would hear is that Vanguard is overpowered. And whether or not Vanguard is overpowered because of the Vulcan in this hypothetical case, I would still argue that Secluded Grove gives a very good plan for the Infernals player, because they can just guard 2 points, which we have now seen across more than a dozen games of Infernals, both in mirrors and in non-mirrors against Vanguard players, and we've seen that they guard the same 2 points, their choice of a set of 2 points, and then they either get up to 3 bases that way, or they go with the plan to get 4 bases, or they 3 base into the 5th, 6th, or 4th, 5th, or the 5th, 6th, into the middle of the map, right? It is very, very, very heavily looking to be Infernal favored. Right? It's very hard or difficult at the current time with the current meta understanding, at least on the patch that was presented to us, to imagine a way in which the Vanguard player wins without the Infernal player really, really deviating from that plan, or really, really not getting outplayed in some crazy fashion that is just bombastically over the top, right? But I would still say, even in that kind of example, Infernals would be favored. Right, their game plan is favored, even if the balance of the game doesn't favor them. Now, I could go into a whole thing about how the term overpowered or underpowered is, to my estimation, misused. I made a video on my channel a while ago about that for an entirely different game that you haven't heard of. You almost certainly haven't heard of if you're coming from here and you're watching this because this is a Stormgate channel, or it's tagged under Stormgate currently. But maybe I'll get into that at the end, especially if anybody wants to know, wants to ask. Next thing, so as a player outside the NDA, outside the beta, I'm outside the NDA. I can create content and speculate to my heart's content without any concern that the things that I guess accidentally lead to guessing something that I know as form of pre-existing knowledge in the NDA, and beta players can't do that. And so what I mean by this is pretty simple. If I'm in the beta and I speculate something and it gets very close to accurate, lots of questions are going to be raised immediately about how I'm skirting the NDA, I'm trying to find ways around the NDA. One of the things that I did is that when I looked at the Artosis Cast 2 and Warrimbo and other people's channels, I was able to click around every time that they were clicking on a unit or an upgrade, I would pause and I would look at the command card as they were highlighting it, and I would write down the description. What's the description of the ability? What is the ability's name called? What does it take in terms of time for it to be researched? What's the cost in Luminite? What's the cost in Therium? What is the effect that it states that it has? How many times are players getting that? When the player is looking at this, are they actually getting that ability? Is there some other ability that they're getting? If they scroll their keys over 3 abilities, right? I think one of the first people outside the beta to show that there is a consume ability on the Magmadon, and it has the ability, an ability to recover 50% of its veil, the white health. We're calling it veil. On this channel, we call white health veil. There's an ability to recover 50% of its veil whenever it consumes a unit. Before the mana series, no one else here would have known that. Now, you could have known that if you were clicking individually, pausing, watching what people were making sure that you saw every little interaction, all the numbers that you could possibly scour, like just an absorbing fiend of monstrous collector of information, like the internet itself, and trying to regurgitate it back onto the internet. But I'm not in the beta, so that's very easy. If you say, how did Etano Circus discover this? Well, Etano Circus went through the video and paused it approximately 100 times until he got all of the information that he wanted. Then he wrote it up in a document and he put it on Reddit, and it was publicly available information because it was released publicly, presumably outside the NDA. It's not quite Etano Circus's fault if he just happens to be a little more zealous than most people in gathering that information. But if I had been part of the beta and I was under an NDA, you guarantee that that wouldn't have happened, because I would have had to have covered my ass on every single thing that I wrote and said, I didn't tell them anything new. I specifically looked at this build that we were on here internally and then made sure that all of those things could have been theoretically captured by a diligent enough person on the outside. And do you think that would have flown over? I've signed NDAs before. I've signed NDAs for technical pre-alphas, for alphas and for betas, open and closed, like limited and open and closed. I have been part of software development teams that have to do with games and don't have to do with games. I have done personal projects that have used these for other people and for myself. I promise you that would not have gone over well. There is no way that that goes over well. In fact, I give an example here, right? In 2016, I was playing, unfortunately in 2016, Artillery Games closed down, and then their flagship game, Guardians of Atlas, went down as well. At that time, the main game mode, and in fact, I think the only game mode, was a 3v3 game mode, right? And on my team was Zinyu and I can't remember, it was either double Dedros or DQ me. I think it was DQ me, because I remember thinking something quite hilarious associated with his name that I won't get into here, because I hope he's having a good life out wherever he is. Bygones be bygones, and that was 7.5, 7.25, something like that years ago at this point. But at that tournament, Zinyu and myself sat and theory crafted, and then we got DQ me to play with us. And we were playing, at the time, if you didn't watch Guardians of Atlas, okay, in the tournament, what you could surmise from the games that were played, and what you factually know, is that every team that won was blue, green, red. And their red was Eris, and their blue was, I think it was Aswan. He could become invincible, and the casters had to explain that multiple times, that he could be invincible when he balled. And then there was a guy named Garrick, and he had like a blunderbuss. That team of three was canonically the best thing that you could do in a 3 setting, in a tournament setting. And at this point, I'm not actually dancing around the lines of anything, because if you go watch those videos, you can see that every single team that won, I think past the round of 8 or maybe even the round of 16, whose team was covered, had that exact composition of 3. And the only team that was different, that was in the top 10 teams, was my team, where we had one white player who was playing Vela. Okay? So on Reddit, I was watching people, and we got 5th, right? We ended up 5th to 8th, but because of tiebreakers and some other stuff, we were just genuinely 5th, and the team that beat us was actually that good, and everything goes on from there, and it's fine. So here's the thing. On Reddit, I had seen that they had posted, this is right before the studio closed down, right before the game closed down. I see that there's a balance patch. The balance patch has people who are playing ones and who weren't in the tournament saying the most outrageous things about whether or not this would change the balance of this unit, or this faction would actually be more powerful. They were saying things like, oh, the white faction, that's just the color, right? The colors were white, green, red, and blue. The white faction is actually just incredibly overpowered. And I had checked, they had received no buffs in the meantime. Now, you might think, well, maybe the nerfs associated with other factions would cause them to have that. No, green had gotten a buff. No one else had gotten buffs or nerfs that were worth mentioning. I think one color didn't even get buffs or nerfs. And white was understood by all people who were playing 3s and practicing and looking for teams and putting in serious work to just be highly substandard. And yet the people who had not played the game, I can't blame them, they weren't in the technical pre-alpha, but had also importantly not watched any of the tournament games, listened to any of the analysis that people had done, or watched any of the video content that I had provided, let alone done any independent thinking about what these abilities were as they were being presented to other people, right? They had done none of that, and yet I was hearing over and over, oh, white is just super giga turbo broken, it's just way too powerful. And here's the thing, at the time I couldn't say anything, because the immediate aftermath of the tournament, it took some time for those VODs and those reviews and that information to come out. As we found out later, is because the studio was closing, right? They wrote that in a Reddit post, and then they put it on their Discord, and yeah, I still hang out on that Discord. They're cool people. What I'm getting at is this, right? So let's think about how this applies all the way back around to Stormgate. So in Stormgate, I watched DreamHack Atlanta live. I made sure that everyone knew I was watching DreamHack Atlanta live. Like, don't bother me. Get off my schedule. I'm watching this. And then after it was done, I watched it again to see what like wasn't covered by the cast. I like doing this. I like watching something the first time as the entertainment product, and then I just let it sit in my head, percolate, like let the unconscious muscles, if you were, of my brain, like the creative juices flow to figure out what I think and what's interesting about this. And then I will go back a second time, turn off the commentary, and do like self-analysis, or just do like, what do I think is happening here, here, and here, right? Then after that, what I did is I went and I looked on the Twitch page for Stormgate, because surely there would be other people casting the DreamHack Atlantis, right? They would either have co-casters, there would be people who were part of the beta who would have extra information, maybe there would be like strong players who were from StarCraft 2 who were looking in on this game and they were giving their perspective even though they weren't in the game, and then other people who were weaker players who were in, who would be able to say something. I didn't see much of any of that. Like, I give the specific example here of Lorimbo, and I'm not dissing Lorimbo, that is not the purpose here. I watched Lorimbo talk about the games, especially the TLO Mana series, and I got the impression that there was some hesitancy. There was something that wasn't being said. There were some comparisons that seemed to be on the tip of his tongue, and then they just went out. Now, I'm an empathetic person. Maybe that's because Lorimbo is not versed in speaking in that way. He's trying to follow a camera that he himself is not controlling. He's not setting the pace of how the game itself is going. He's doing it live. Maybe that's just not his style. Maybe it's a personal thing, right, about how he's presenting it. So I watched other streams and I watched other reaction videos, and you know what I saw? The same hesitancy every single time from every single person who was reviewing the games, kind of like professionally teetering on the edge to make sure that they didn't say anything that would actually violate their NDA. They couldn't say something like, I don't know if this is true. I want to stress. But they didn't say anything like, I'll pick a ridiculous example. Oh, wow, if you think fiends are bad in this game, they get 4 times the speed in the new patch. Right? Obviously, they can't say anything like that because they're under an NDA, and that would be video recorded proof that they had violated the NDA. And for the same reason I mentioned in the first point, they can't speculate along lines that lead to an outsider presupposing that same hidden information, because you have to really check your back and make sure that you know that that could have been found out elsewhere, and make sure that you can't actually be had by the people to whom that NDA is ultimately accountable, right? And I saw that everywhere. And so people were saying, well, you're not in the beta. Basically, the implication is I'll wait for people who are in the beta to do the analysis that I need so I can get the information that I want. I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. Those people are not going to break their NDA, break their chance of possibly getting into the first early tournaments of a new esport. There's a $10,000 tournament coming up. You think Joe Schmo 45, who is like top 100 on that ladder, who's grinding every consecutive minute of their life and then departiculating it down to seconds so they can build a time machine to practice in the microseconds? Do you think that person is going to risk a $10,000 tournament to write up a 250 or a 2,500 view YouTube video that says, I'm in the beta, here's everything you need to know? They're not gonna do that. Also, even if they do that, what happens if they then have to skip because there's a patch note? Now their information's outdated, so congrats, you got your one video one time, right? The best you can hope for are the casts that we have seen. For instance, we saw when Mana was just released his video today, Mana was going through his thought process as he's playing the game. That's incredibly insightful because Mana is the person who is playing the game, all 4 of them as it turns out, or 3.5 depending on how you kind of disconnect, and is providing us our thought process and is letting us know what he's intuiting. And I actually think people don't understand the degree to which what Mana is sub-communicating in some of those conversations, right? The way that he believes that some things should just be understood about the game state that would not be apparent or obvious to people who are outside of the beta who haven't analyzed it. Yet surprisingly seem familiar to me, who is outside the beta but has analyzed. Anyways, I don't want to get too far into the weeds there, right? You're not going to get the analytical content that you want unless it's literally the case like Mana, where someone is giving you their first-person VOD, basically their FP VOD, right, and giving you their first, like their thoughts as they're playing the game live, or it's a cast. And when it's a cast, actually, a cast takes a very different term from analysis. And you know the pause, I'll just put it this way. You know the pausing that I do all the time? There's no time for that when you're casting. I've done casting before for a different game, and for different games, in fact, that, again, many of you have not ever heard of. But guess what? You don't have time in casting to pause everything and go back to the point that you should have made 2 minutes ago. That time is over and gone. You have to get on to the next point while you're over here dithering about whether or not someone's fiend could have been mismicroed in this manner against this scout over here. There's an all-in happening over there, right? If we were, like, for instance, if I was doing my analysis of Azure versus Theory, and I was talking about how Azure is using this point on the low ground natural to generate some vision and some towers, and it's really putting pressure on what Theory is going to do. If I was talking about that and discussing the minutia of how the hedgehogs should have microed back against individual fiends, we'd have completely missed the fact that Azure went and took the base over on the side over here instead of tucked down over by the light forest area next to their natural, right? You don't have time to go back when you're casting. You do when you're doing analysis. Analysis also kind of demands that you have more access to information or have generated more thoughts so that you have done more analysis, right? Casting, I've slipped into this routine myself for another game, Little War Game. Sometimes when there's nothing going on, you just trade jokes or you banter. You don't do much of anything that actually is on the game, because how many one-racks expands you're going to see in your life? Oh, both players went for a fast expansion on a map that's bigger than Valley Forge in the winter from end to end instead of across the narrowest part of the peak. Right? There's nothing to talk about. You're waiting for units to generate. Or if you see something